The psychic wave rolled through Horizon Station like invisible thunder. In the botanical gardens, the Teluvian gardeners clutched their heads and fell to their knees. In the diplomacy wing, Ambassador Verena gasped and pressed her palm against the nearest wall for support. Even the artificial intelligence systems registered the disturbance as unexplained fluctuations in their processing matrices. Something ancient was calling out, and every sensitive mind in the station felt it. Like a hook pulling at their consciousness, Theo Winters was 3 levels, deep in the maintenance tunnels when the emergency announcement crackled through the station speakers. He paused in the middle of replacing a filtration unit, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his work glove. The voice of Station Director Holm echoed through the narrow corridor, requesting all personnel with telepathic or empathic abilities to report to Medical Bay 7 immediately. Something about a patient making a final request. Theo shrugged and went back to his work. He had been on Horizon Station for 4 years now, ever since the accident that took his daughter. Earth had become impossible after that. Every street corner and coffee shop a reminder of her laughter. When the posting for general maintenance appeared on the job boards, Theo applied without hesitation. He needed distance measured in light years, silence measured in empty corridors, and work that required no thought beyond fixing what was broken. The maintenance tunnels suited him perfectly. Down here beneath the gleaming floors where ambassadors negotiated treaties and scientists made discoveries, Theo could spend entire shifts without seeing another living soul. The hum of machinery was his only companion, and that was exactly how he wanted it. No questions about his past, no sympathetic looks, no attempts at comfort that only made the emptiness more obvious. By the time Theo emerged from the tunnels, it was well past midnight station time. The corridors of Level 12 were dark, except for the emergency lighting strips along the floor. He made his way to the supply closet, returned his tools, and prepared to start his usual rounds. The preservation archives would be empty now, the researchers having gone to their quarters hours ago. That was when Theo did his best work, moving through the silent halls like a ghost, ensuring everything remained exactly as it should be. The preservation archives housed some of the oldest artifacts in known space, texts from civilizations that had crumbled to dust millions of years ago, technology so ancient that nobody remembered how it functioned, fragments of cultures that existed before most current species had even evolved. Theo was responsible for maintaining the environmental systems that kept these treasures from degrading further. Temperature, humidity, air filtration all had to remain within precise parameters. It was monotonous work, which meant it was perfect. Theo could check readouts and clean dust from preservation cases without engaging his mind in any meaningful way. The emptiness inside him required that kind of mindless routine. Thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to the kind of pain that made breathing difficult. He had been working in the archives for 2 months when he first discovered Storage Bay 9. The door was unmarked, just another access panel in a corridor full of them. Theo had only opened it because his checklist indicated the environmental sensors inside needed calibration. The bay was small, barely larger than a closet, with a single preservation case mounted on a pedestal in the center. Inside the case were 9 crystals, each roughly the size of an apple, arranged in a perfect circle. They were beautiful in a strange, unsettling way. Their surfaces seemed to shift colors depending on the angle, flowing from deep purple to silver to something that was not quite any color at all. The identification placard offered minimal information. Origin unknown. Age estimated at 80,000 to 100,000 years. Purpose uncertain. All attempts at analysis have proven inconclusive. Current status inert and non-responsive. Theo had been about to leave when he felt it. Not a sound, not exactly. More like a vibration that started in his chest and spread outward through his entire body. He stepped closer to the case and the sensation intensified. It reminded him of standing near powerful speakers at a concert, feeling the bass notes as much as hearing them. But there was no music playing. The archives were silent. He stood there for 10 minutes, just feeling that strange resonance. It did not hurt. Actually, it was almost comforting in a way he could not explain. It's like being wrapped in something warm after years of cold. When he finally left to continue his rounds, he found himself thinking about the crystals for the rest of the shift. The next night, Theo returned to Storage Bay 9. He told himself it was just part of his routine. that he needed to verify the environmental readings were stable. But he knew that was a lie. He wanted to feel that vibration again, wanted to stand in the presence of something that made him feel less hollow. This time, he brought his dinner with him. Theo sat on the floor with his back against the wall, eating a protein bar while the crystals hummed their soundless song. He began to notice patterns in the vibration. It was not random. There were rhythms to it, recurring sequences that almost felt like language. Not words, but something deeper than words, pure meaning without the messy filter of grammar and syntax. Over the following weeks, Storage Bay 9 became Theo's refuge. He spent every break there, every spare moment between maintenance tasks. The other workers on the station thought he was odd, but they left him alone. His supervisor appreciated that he was reliable and thorough. The researchers never noticed him at all, which was exactly what Theo wanted. He had built a small, silent life in the shadows of the archives, and the crystals were the only companionship he needed. By his second year on the station, something remarkable had happened. Theo could hum along with the crystals. He did not understand how or why it worked. He certainly did not understand what the humming meant, but when he matched his voice to that strange vibration, something inside him settled. The emptiness did not disappear, but it became bearable. The grief over his daughter transformed from a sharp wound into a dull ache he could carry. The crystals became his ritual. Every night Theo would sit in Storage Bay 9 and hum. He learned the patterns by heart, could reproduce them perfectly even when he was alone in his quarters. The melody, if it could be called that, became part of him. He hummed it while he worked, hummed it while he ate, hummed it in the moments before sleep finally claimed him. Nobody else heard the crystals. Theo knew this because he once asked a researcher who was passing through the archives. She had looked at him strangely and explained that the crystals were completely inert, dead stone that held no value except as curiosities from a vanished age. Theo had nodded and gone back to his work, keeping the truth to himself. The crystals were not dead. They were singing. And somehow, impossibly, Theo was the only one who could hear them. Now, 4 years into his tenure on Horizon Station, Theo had perfected his quiet existence. He worked, he ate, he slept, and he spent time with the crystals. It was not happiness, but it was stability. It was survival. He expected to continue this way indefinitely, fading into the background of the station until eventually he faded away entirely. He had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that his nightly ritual with the crystals had prepared him for a moment that would alter the course of his life and ripple outward to touch the entire galaxy, that the psychic call everyone had felt earlier that day was meant specifically for him, for the lonely maintenance worker who had learned to sing in a language older than civilizations. Theo finished his rounds and made his way to Storage Bay 9, ready for another quiet night with the crystals. He opened the door, stepped inside, and began to hum. And 3 levels above him in Medical Bay 7, a dying celestial serpent opened its eyes for the first time in days and began to glow. The summons came through on Theo's work tablet at 0300 hours, jolting him awake from restless sleep. Ambassador Verena requested his immediate presence in Conference Room 14. Theo stared at the message in confusion, reading it 3 times to make sure he had understood correctly. In 4 years on Horizon Station, he had never been called to a conference room. He had never spoken to an ambassador. He barely spoke to anyone. He dressed quickly, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he made some mistake in his work? Had someone filed a complaint? But the message tone was urgent, not disciplinary. Something else was happening, something he could not quite grasp. The corridors were empty at this hour, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Conference Room 14 was in the administrative sector, a part of the station Theo rarely visited. The door slid open at his approach, revealing a cramped space with a table and several chairs. Ambassador Verena was waiting for him, her silver skin gleaming under the overhead lights. She was Calthene, a species known for their diplomatic skills and their sensitivity to emotional currents. Right now she looked exhausted. "Mr. Winters, thank you for coming so quickly. Please sit down. We have very little time." Theo sat, his hands folded nervously in his lap. "What is this about, Ambassador?" Verena leaned forward, her large eyes fixed on his face. "Are you familiar with the celestial serpents?" Theo shook his head slowly. "I have heard stories, I think. Ancient creatures that lived in space, but I do not know much about them. There is one dying in our medical bay right now. It arrived at the station 6 days ago, already in critical condition. We have done everything we can to make it comfortable, but there is nothing we can do to save it. This morning it sent out a psychic call to every sensitive mind on the station. It has one final request before it dies. Theo waited, not understanding what any of this had to do with him. The serpent wants to see the human who knows its name, Verena continued. Its true name, not the labels we have given its species. We have been interviewing every human on the station for the past 18 hours. You are the last one on our list. I do not know anything about celestial serpents, Theo said quietly. I am just a maintenance worker. Verena pulled up a file on her tablet. But you work in the preservation archives. You have been assigned there for 4 years. In that time, have you encountered anything unusual? Any artifacts or texts that seemed strange? Theo thought about Storage Bay 9. He thought about the crystals and the humming that only he could hear. For years, he had kept that experience private, afraid that sharing it would somehow diminish it or make it disappear. But the ambassador was looking at him with such intensity, and there was something in her expression that suggested this mattered more than he could understand. There are crystals, he said slowly, in Storage Bay 9. The researchers say they are inert, but I can hear them. Or feel them, I guess. They hum. Verena sat up straighter. What do you mean? It is hard to explain. Like a vibration that has patterns to it. I started spending time with them because it made me feel less alone. Eventually I learned to hum along with them. It is just something I do now. Can you reproduce the sound? Theo hesitated. The humming felt deeply personal, like sharing a piece of himself he had kept hidden. But something in the ambassador's urgency made him want to help. He closed his eyes, thinking about the crystals. He remembered the feeling of sitting in that small bay, the vibration resonating through his chest. He let the first notes rise from deep inside him. The sound that emerged was not quite music and not quite language. It was something older than both. A resonance that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the bones. Theo hummed the pattern he had learned over thousands of hours, the melody that had kept him company through years of grief. Verena's tablet erupted with notifications. She grabbed it, her eyes widening as she read. The serpent just woke up. Its vital signs are spiking. The medical team says it is trying to move for the first time in days. She looked at Theo with something like awe. This happened the exact moment you started humming. I do not understand, Theo said. Neither do I, but the serpent does. Verena stood quickly. Mr. Winters, I need you to come with me to Medical Bay 7 right now. The serpent has been waiting for you. They took the express elevator, rising through the station in tense silence. Theo's mind was spinning. How could his private ritual with the crystals be connected to a dying alien creature he had never met? What did it mean that the humming had awakened something ancient and powerful? The medical bay was in chaos when they arrived. Dozens of people crowded the corridor, all trying to see through the observation window into the central chamber. Scientists, diplomats, medical staff all pressed together in a mass of bodies. Security personnel were attempting to establish order, but everyone wanted to witness what was happening inside. Professor Dulaine intercepted them before they reached the chamber door. He was Morellian, tall and skeletal with 4 arms that gestured constantly as he spoke. Ambassador Verena, this is highly irregular. We should be analyzing whatever sound this human produced, running it through linguistic databases. We cannot simply allow untrained personnel direct access to a patient of such immense historical significance. The patient specifically requested this. Verena replied firmly. The patient is dying and possibly delirious. We have no evidence this maintenance worker actually knows anything meaningful. He produced a sound. That is all. It could be pure coincidence. Theo stood quietly while they argued. Through the observation window, he could see the serpent for the first time. It was massive. Easily 60 feet long, with scales that shifted between colors he could not name. Its body was coiled in the center of a specially constructed chamber, surrounded by medical equipment that beeped and hummed. Even dying, even diminished, the creature radiated a presence that made Theo's breath catch. Then the serpent's eye opened and looked directly at him. In that moment, Theo felt the same vibration he felt every night in Storage Bay 9. The serpent was not making sound, but its presence resonated at exactly the same frequency as the crystals. They were connected somehow, pieces of the same ancient song. It is calling me, Theo said quietly. The arguing stopped. Everyone turned to look at him. I can feel it, Theo continued. The same way I feel the crystals. It is the same sound, the same resonance. The serpent wants me to come inside. The medical team conferred in rapid, hushed voices. Finally, the lead physician, a being with blue skin and 6 eyes, made an announcement. Patient autonomy is our highest ethical principle. If the serpent wishes to see this human, we cannot refuse its request. Professor Dulaine looked furious, but Verena was already moving toward the airlock. Mr. Winters, are you ready? Theo was not ready. Fear coiled in his stomach and his hands trembled. But he nodded and followed her to the chamber door. As he stepped through the airlock, the humming in his chest grew stronger. The serpent's scales began to pulse with light, colors flowing across its body in waves. Theo walked forward slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Up close, the serpent was even more magnificent. Each scale was the size of his hand, etched with patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The serpent's eye tracked his movement. Theo could feel hundreds of people watching from outside the chamber, their attention pressing against him like a physical weight. But all of that faded into background noise. The only thing that mattered was the ancient being in front of him and the resonance that connected them. Theo began to hum. The melody rose from somewhere deep inside him, the pattern he had learned from the crystals. The serpent's scales pulsed brighter in response, matching the rhythm of his humming. And then something extraordinary happened. The serpent's consciousness reached out to his, not forcing entry but offering connection. Theo gasped and the humming faltered. The serpent's eye blinked slowly, a clear question. Theo understood he could refuse if he wanted to. This was an invitation, not a demand. Theo closed his eyes and opened himself to the connection. The serpent's presence flooded into his mind, vast and ancient and utterly unlike anything he had ever experienced. There were no words, no sentences structured in human grammar. Instead, Theo felt impressions, emotions, images that carried meaning without language. The serpent was thanking him. Not for coming to the medical bay, but for remembering. For sitting with the crystals night after night when everyone else had declared them worthless. For learning their song when the entire galaxy had forgotten how to listen. Theo tried to project his confusion. He had not known what he was doing. He had just been lonely, looking for something to fill the emptiness inside him. The crystals had been comfort, nothing more. The serpent's response was a wave of warm understanding. That was exactly the point. Theo had approached the crystals with no agenda, no desire to extract information or prove theories. He had simply been present with them. That openness, that willingness to sit with mystery without needing to solve it, was what allowed him to hear what others could not. But why me? Theo thought. I am nobody, just a maintenance worker who barely finished school. Why would something as ancient as you need someone like me? The serpent's answer came as a cascade of images and feelings. Theo saw civilizations rising from primitive tribes to galactic empires. He watched them flourish, create wonders, develop technologies that bent the laws of physics. And then he watched them fall, crumbling back into dust as entropy claimed everything they had built. The cycle repeated endlessly, species after species, age after age. The serpent had witnessed all of it. 50,000 years of galactic history had passed while it drifted through space, observing but rarely interfering. It had seen so much beauty and so much loss that the weight of memory had become almost unbearable. The loneliness of outliving everything, of watching civilizations bloom and fade like flowers, had hollowed out something inside the ancient creature. Names, the serpent explained through impressions rather than words, were not labels. They were resonances, the fundamental frequency at which a consciousness vibrated through the universe. True names could not be written or spoken in conventional language. They existed before language was invented, in the space between thoughts and the pause between heartbeats. Every species in the galaxy had tried to understand the celestial serpents by translating them into their own frameworks. They wanted definitions, categories, measurements. They wanted to capture the serpents in databases and research papers. But names like the serpents could only be felt, only echoed by those willing to listen without trying to understand. Humans were young. So young that most galactic species still considered them barely civilized. But that youth meant humans still remembered how to know things they had not learned. They could feel truths they could not prove. Most advanced species had traded that capacity away in exchange for sophisticated analysis and precise measurement. You are saying I can hear you because I do not try to analyze it, Theo thought. Because I just let the crystals be what they are, without needing to explain them. The serpent's amusement rippled through their connection like warm water. Close enough. It was not ignorance exactly, but innocence. The willingness to sit with mystery and let it remain mysterious. Then the serpent began to share its memories with Theo, not as information to be catalogued, but as lived experience. Theo felt what it was like to drift through the birth of a solar system, watching planets coalesce from cosmic dust. He sensed the texture of civilizations at their peak, the particular quality of hope that defined each age. He understood loss at a scale that made his own grief feel both tiny and infinite at once. The serpent had seen empires that spanned galaxies crumble to nothing. It had watched species evolve from single cells to starfaring peoples and then vanish completely from existence. Every ending carried the same weight. Every lost voice mattered equally. The pain of it all had accumulated over millennia until the serpent carried an ocean of sorrow inside its ancient heart. "Why show me this?" Theo asked through their connection. "Why give me this burden?" The serpent's response was complex, layered with meanings Theo had to untangle slowly. It was dying, returning to whatever cosmic force had birthed it 50,000 years ago. When it dissolved, all of its accumulated experience would dissolve with it. The facts would remain, recorded in archives across the galaxy, but the feeling of those facts, the emotional truth of what it meant to witness so much time, that would be lost, unless someone could hold it, not as data, but as understanding, as remembrance. The serpent was not giving Theo information. It was giving him depth, the ability to feel the weight of ages, to understand time as something more than sequential moments. It was a gift and a burden both, and the serpent wanted Theo to understand what he was accepting before the transfer was complete. Theo thought about his small life, his work checking environmental systems and mopping floors, the quiet nights in Storage Bay 9, the grief he still carried for his daughter, the hole in his heart that had never healed. What would it mean to add 50,000 years of memory on top of that? Could he carry such weight without being crushed by it? But then he thought about the crystals, about how they had kept him company during his darkest nights, about how the humming had given him something to hold on to when he had been ready to let go of everything. The serpent had been calling across time, leaving pieces of itself scattered through the galaxy, hoping someone would eventually learn to listen. Theo could not refuse that, would not refuse it. He opened himself fully to the connection and let the serpent pour its experience into him. The transfer was overwhelming. Theo's body collapsed to its knees, but his mind was expanding, touching edges of understanding he had never imagined possible. He felt the birth of galaxies, the death of stars, the fragile beauty of every civilization that ever looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. When the connection finally released him, Theo was crying. Not from sadness exactly, but from the weight of everything he now carried. The serpent's eye was dimming, its energy spent. But there was peace in its gaze now, gratitude, relief. Through their fading connection, Theo felt one last message. The serpent's name, the true name that was a frequency rather than a word, was now part of Theo's own resonance. When he hummed, he was not just repeating a song. He was speaking identity. He was saying, "I see you, I remember you. You existed and mattered." For a being that had outlived entire ages of the galaxy, that was enough. That was everything. Theo stayed, on his knees beside the serpent as its breathing slowed. The scales lost their light one final time. The medical monitor showed consciousness fading to nothing. But Theo could still feel the serpent's presence, fainter now, but not gone. Not truly gone, because he remembered, and in that remembrance, the serpent would live on. Theo spent 5 days in the medical wing after his time with the serpent. The doctors insisted on running tests, scanning his brain, mapping his consciousness for any signs of damage or alteration. Everything came back normal. His biology showed no changes, but everyone who interacted with him could feel that something fundamental had shifted. He moved differently now, with a deliberate carefulness, as if he was aware of weight that others could not see. Ambassador Verena visited him on the 3rd day. She found him sitting by the window, staring out at the stars with an expression she could not quite read. "How are you feeling, Mr. Winters?" Theo turned to look at her. "I feel like I am carrying 50,000 years inside my chest. I feel like I understand things I should not understand. I look at this station and I can feel how temporary it is. How everything is temporary. Is that frightening?" "No," Theo said quietly. "It is sad but not frightening. More like being let in on a secret. Everything ends, but everything also matters." The serpent wanted me to understand that. To hold that truth and carry it forward. Verena sat down across from him. "The scientific community wants to study you. They want to map the memories the serpent transferred. They believe it could contain information vital to understanding galactic history." "The memories are not information," Theo said. "They are experience, feeling. I do not think they can be extracted like data from a computer." Professor Dulain does not agree. He is organizing a council of researchers who specialize in consciousness transfer. They want your permission to attempt a mapping procedure. Theo felt something stir inside him, a presence that was not quite his own, but had become part of him. The serpent's consciousness, or what remained of it, recoiled at the idea. This was not knowledge meant to be extracted and filed away in databases. It was a gift given in trust, meant to be held by a living mind willing to carry its weight. "No," Theo said firmly. "I will not allow that." The meeting happened 2 days later in a large conference room packed with scientists and diplomats. Professor Dulain stood at the head of the table, his forearms gesturing as he made his case. The serpent's knowledge represents an irreplaceable resource. 50,000 years of observations, interactions with thousands of civilizations, insights into the nature of consciousness itself. All of this currently resides in the mind of a single human with no scientific training. This is unacceptable. "The knowledge does not reside in my mind," Theo said quietly from his seat at the end of the table. "The experience does. There is a difference." "A distinction without meaning," Dulain replied. "Whatever the serpent gave you can and should be preserved through proper scientific methods. We have the technology to map consciousness, to extract memories and store them in formats that can be studied and shared. Refusing to cooperate is selfish and short-sighted. The serpent chose me specifically because I would not treat its gift as data to be extracted," Theo said. He could feel anger building inside him, a rare emotion that the weight of the serpent's memories had made sharper. "It trusted me to hold something precious, and I will not betray that trust." "You are one person," Dulain said. "What happens when you die? The serpent's legacy dies with you, but if we map the memories now, they can be preserved indefinitely, shared with researchers across the galaxy, used to advance our understanding of everything from consciousness to the origins of spacefaring civilizations." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. The logic was compelling. Theo was mortal. The knowledge he carried was too valuable to risk losing. Extracting it was the rational choice, the responsible choice. But Theo thought about the serpent's loneliness, about how it had drifted through space for 50,000 years, watching civilizations treated as a curiosity, a source of data, a mystery to be solved. Nobody had approached it as a living being with feelings and experiences worth honoring for their own sake. Nobody had simply sat with it and listened. "The serpent did not give me a database," Theo said. "It gave me understanding. The weight of witnessing so much time. The pain of losing so many voices. That is not something you can extract with your machines because it is not stored in my neurons. It is woven into how I see the world now, how I feel about existence. You want to treat the serpent's gift like a book that can be copied and distributed, but it was never a book. It was a relationship." The room went quiet. Professor Dulain opened his mouth to argue, but Ambassador Verena raised her hand. "Mr. Winters is correct. The serpent chose him specifically. It could have shared its knowledge with any of our researchers, our diplomats, our consciousness specialists, but it waited for someone who had learned to listen without trying to understand, someone who approached the crystals with presence rather than analysis." That choice must be honored. This is sentiment overriding reason, Dulain protested. We have an ethical obligation to preserve knowledge of this magnitude. We also have an ethical obligation to respect the wishes of dying beings, Verena countered. The serpent made its choice. We must accept that choice, even if we do not fully understand it. The council debated for 2 more hours, but eventually Verena's position carried the day. Theo would not be subjected to consciousness mapping. The serpent's gift would remain with him, held in trust rather than extracted for study. Professor Dulain stormed out of the conference room, furious at what he called a catastrophic failure of scientific responsibility. Theo returned to his quarters that night feeling exhausted but relieved. He had protected the serpent's trust, but he still did not know what he was supposed to do with the weight he now carried. How did one honor a gift of such magnitude? How did one live a normal life while holding 50,000 years of memory inside? The answer came to him slowly over the following weeks. Theo returned to his maintenance work, checking environmental systems and cleaning preservation cases. But now he approached his tasks differently. When he dusted an artifact from a vanished civilization, he could feel the lives that had created it. The hopes and fears of people who had been dust for millions of years became real to him in a way they never had before. He started spending more time in the archives, not just maintaining them but truly seeing them. Each text, each artifact, each fragment of lost culture represented voices that had once mattered. The serpent had taught him that every ending carried weight, that every lost voice deserved to be remembered. So Theo began to remember. He would sit with artifacts and let himself feel their age, their significance. He would read fragments of dead languages and imagine the people who had written them. He brought flowers to the preservation cases, small gestures of honor for civilizations that nobody else remembered. The researchers noticed his strange behavior, but they left him alone. The odd maintenance worker who talked to ancient stones was harmless enough. What Theo understood, what the serpent had given him, was that remembrance itself was a form of resurrection. The civilizations were gone, yes. The people were dust. But in Theo's witnessing, in his willingness to feel the weight of their existence, they lived again for a moment. Not as data points in a historical archive, but as real beings whose lives had mattered. 6 months after the serpent's death, Theo returned to Storage Bay 9. The crystals were still there, still humming their soundless song, but now Theo understood what they were. Not artifacts or curiosities, but pieces of the serpent itself, shed across thousands of years and scattered through the galaxy. Each crystal carried a fragment of the serpent's consciousness, waiting patiently for someone willing to learn their song. Theo sat on the floor and hummed with the crystals. But now his humming carried more than just the melody he had learned. It carried 50,000 years of memory of loss of the bittersweet beauty of existence. The crystals resonated more strongly than they ever had before, as if recognizing in Theo's voice the consciousness they had been separated from for so long. In that small bay surrounded by fragments of an ancient being, Theo finally understood his purpose. He would live his quiet life, maintain his environmental systems, dust his preservation cases, but he would do it all as an act of witnessing, of remembering, of holding space for voices that nobody else could hear. The serpent had given him the ability to feel the weight of ages. Theo would honor that gift by carrying that weight forward with care and intention. Years later, when Theo was old and his body was failing, he would return one final time to Storage Bay 9. He would sit with the crystals and hum the serpent's true name, the resonance that defined its existence, and as his consciousness faded, he would feel the serpent waiting for him, ready to reclaim the memories it had entrusted to a lonely maintenance worker who had learned to listen. The gift would not die with Theo. It would return to the cosmic force that had birthed the serpents, joining the eternal song that played beneath the surface of reality. And somewhere in the future, another lonely soul would find fragments of that song and learn to hum along, continuing the cycle of remembrance that honored every voice, every life, every ending that had ever mattered. That was the serpent's true gift, not knowledge, but the understanding that nothing is ever truly lost as long as someone remembers. And in remembering, we give meaning to existence itself. Retry.